session is titled God and Government. Should the state leave religion alone? For this, I'd like to invite Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan, Mr. R. Jagannathan, and Mr. Rajeev Bhargava. And to moderate the discussion, I'd like to invite Mr. N. Ravi, publisher, the Hindu Group of Newspapers. Ladies and gentlemen, God and government, should the state leave religion alone?
Good morning and welcome to the second session of the final day of the huddle. Let me start with, many of you might be wondering about the name the Hindu and how it chose the subject God and religion. Let me start with what the Hindu said in its very first editorial in September of 1878 when it started publication. The editorial titled Ourselves had this to say on the question of religion. In religion, we shall observe the strictest neutrality. Sectarian disputes we shall never allow to appear in our columns. But when religious questions involve the interests of a social or political character, we shall keep our columns open to any prudent remarks and legitimate criticism. This neutrality among religions has been the guiding principle of the Hindu over the last 140 years. That's just by the way to link the title and the newspaper. The title of the discussion, God and Religion, Should the State Leave Religion Alone, could suggest one of two different things or both. The first is that the state should have nothing to do with religion. It should not have a state religion. It should not discriminate against any religion. The second sense in which the title could be interpreted is the state should leave religious practices free without interference. It should leave religious groups to practice in their own way without interference by the state. Both these interpretations still leave a great deal of room for contestation. For instance, what if a certain religious practice goes against current norms of fairness, decency, morality, or humane feeling? What if a certain practice goes against basic constitutional values of equality, fairness, and justice? What if it violates the prohibition of discrimination against any person on the basis of religion, caste, or gender? In other words, can practices in the name of religion trump all other values? In the past, we have had socio-cultural practices associated with religion being outlawed with penal sanctions, as for instance, sati, child marriage, and dowry. In the more recent period, we have had the triple talaq declared illegal by the Supreme Court, with the government subsequently seeking to impose penal sanctions through the legislation. Again, the prohibition of entry of women into places of public worship, such as Sabarimala or the Dargah, has been declared to violate the constitutional prohibition against discrimination. At the heart of such questions lies the issue of what exactly the right to religion involves. Should practices associated with religion trump all other values? All these are widely contested issues, and to discuss them, we have an extremely well-informed panel. We have on my left Mr. Jagannathan, senior journalist with over 42 years of experience in the field, who has launched many publications, including Business Today, DNA, First Post, and so on. And more recently, his focus has been on digital journalism, digital commentary. He was awarded the Sri Ram Sanlan Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016 and is the editorial director currently of Swarajya magazine, associated earlier with Rajaji. On my immediate right, you have Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan, former cabinet minister, member of parliament for many terms, who has held portfolios of ranging from information and broadcasting to agriculture, energy, industry, and civil aviation. He is also an author of a book titled Text and Context, Quran and Contemporary Challenges, published by Rupa and Company. He and his wife together run an NGO called Samarpan, which does help for physically challenged people. On the extreme right is a distinguished academic, Mr. Rajeev Bhargava, who had been professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University and earlier had headed the Department of Political Science at Delhi University. He is the author of many acclaimed books in the field and is currently working on ancient Indian thought. Now, I would start with Professor Bhargava. If you could just outline your thoughts on the issues raised briefly.
Thank you very much. So, I think the answer has already been provided by you. In my take on this is that it all depends on what you mean by religion. If by religion is meant some relationship with the transcendent, whether it is through personal beliefs or collective practices, and if the whole idea involved in religion is to dig deeper and to go higher, then in all those spiritual exercises by which you realize yourself or you develop yourself or to improve yourself, there is absolutely no reason why the government or the state should intervene or interfere. That is the sphere of freedom, right? Whether it is understood in individualistic terms or in collective terms. But religion has often meant something more. Sometimes there is no way to conduct these spiritual exercises unless you become a member of an institutionalized group, which group has certain relations of power, hierarchies, of status, and all your relationship with the transcendent is always mediated by your membership in a group. And the people who control this, who exercise control over all these practices, they often become gatekeepers on what is to be done and what is not to be done, who is to enter and who is to exit. They decide on memberships and so on. And I think if that's what religion is, and we know that in the West, in Latin Christendom particularly, but also elsewhere, this institutionalized group, namely the church, had begun to exercise a lot of power, and with the formation of the modern state, actually gave us an opportunity to control this absolute power of the church. And if that is what religion is, namely an institutionalized community or the church, then there is no reason why the state, in some respects, should alter this power structure and should interfere in religion. And sometimes religion, and that's my third point, sometimes religion is conceived as a cumulative tradition, as a way of life. And if that is the case, then the very distinction between religion and the social, or religion and cultural, breaks down. And there's all the more reason for the state then to be careful and be very discriminatory in figuring out which are the spheres which are to be left alone and which spheres it must intervene in. So really, you can look at all these different conceptions of religion as dimensions of religion. And my view is that the state always has to take a very complex stand on this issue. There are some dimensions which it should leave absolutely free, but there are others where you have to intervene. There are one other point, and that is, or maybe very quickly, two other points. One is that the state that I have in mind, or the government that I have in mind, is a democratic government. I would never allow an authoritarian state to intervene in any aspect of religion, as I would not allow, which by that I mean I would protest against an authoritarian government intervening in any aspect of religion, even those aspects of religion where there is domination of some kind or another, because this is something which has to come from below. Unless you take the community into account, unless you take people's consent into account, I don't think a state should intervene. And finally, the question that has been posed for us is whether state should leave religion alone. But it's an equally important matter that religion should leave the state alone. And there are a number of reasons for that. I'll only say one thing. And so even if you take the most important spiritual exercises of any one religion, I don't think that religion, no matter how great it is, and no matter how good its traditions, should influence the state in a deeply diverse society. In societies which are deeply diverse, the best that you can do is to allow every religion, and by that I now mean every religio-philosophical view, because in diverse societies you have some people believing in God, one God, some people believing in many gods and goddesses, and there are others, and we have very strong atheistic traditions in India, the Buddhists, the Jains, the Mimamsa. I think they believe in no God, and all of these should have an equal opportunity to influence the basic sort of ethical character of the state. Either there should be no influence, or all traditions should be given an equal opportunity to influence the constitutional goals of the state and so on. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Professor Bhargava, for providing perspectives that have clarified the issues. Now, Arif Mohammed Khan, your very famous dissent on the Muslim Women's Personal Law Bill is still remembered. You have been a liberal since that point, and we'd like to hear your thoughts on religion and state.
Religion and state. Thank you very much, Ravi bhai. A leading Orientalist, rather maybe two of them, they have said the same remark both about Sanskrit and Arabic language. And the remark is that there is no Indian whole without two openings. And same remark has been used by someone else about the Arabic language. So it is very important what it means. The word, any word may be interpreted, understood differently. In order to understand the proper import of a term, we must understand the context in which it is being used. Sir, here the basic question is, religion, are we using the term in the Indian paradigm, in the context of Indian paradigm, or the Western paradigm? Because as far as Indian context, and I would say not just Indian, even my understanding is that it applies to Eastern context, which includes Islam as well. The Indian paradigm is, you have Sanatan Dharma, the eternal principles, eternal values, ideals, and you have Yug Dharma, certain values and ideals which are specific to the times in which we are living. The Indian tradition has always viewed an individual, or rather has not viewed an individual in terms of variables or alienable factors like your language, your race, your gender, but invariable and inalienable characteristics. And that is divinity of mankind. What I am today, or in this birth of mine, that is not my permanent identity. I'm sure many of the people here in the audience, the famous composition of Shankaracharya, Mano Buddha Hankar Chittani Naham, Nacha Shrotra Jive, Nacha Ghran Netre, Nacha Vyom Bhumir, Na Tejo Navayu, Chidanand Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. Who am I? I am neither this, not this, not this, not ears, not tongue, not this. Then who am I? Chidanand Rupa Shivoham Shivo. Eternal bliss, which is identified with the divinity, which is identified with the soul, the spirit. And this changing character is best illustrated a small couplet by a Hindi poet. He says, Ram and Krishna, both are avatars of Vishnu. The purpose of their taking birth is the same. Yet they are so different. They present almost contradictory picture. Ram, I hope people here understand Hindi, but if some do not, then I will translate it. Ram, Maryada Purushottam. Ek Bani, Ek Vachni, Ek Patni. Krishna, Leela Purushottam. Makhan Chor, Chit Chor, Ran Chor. Their conduct, their lifestyle, their actions are total. One is called Maryada Purushottam. Stickler for rules, for respecting boundaries, for honoring word. The other, the Mahabharata is full of incidents where he has gone to any length to break the rules or to provoke others to break the rules. Yet, the end, the motivation was the same. They wanted to both wanted to serve the larger cause. And that is what has been described as upholding the dharma. So my point is that this is the philosophical, historical background, and then our constitution, right from Article 25 to 28, it imposes certain duties on the state. The state can't keep away from the... Why it can't keep away? Because what state cannot interfere in and what state must keep away from is what is signified by the word adhyatma. That in fact, in this sense, religion is used in the Western paradigm. Here in Indian paradigm, the word which is the appropriate word is adhyatma. Tapa so adhyay nirittam. Ever devoted to the pursuit of the knowledge. Knowledge of what? Knowledge of the self. Aham brahmasmi tattvamasi. So that certainly state has no role in that field. But if it comes to practices which generally it is believed that they have the sanction of the religion or they come from certain, rooted in certain religious belief, and these practices run contrary to public morality, health, repugnant to the constitutional morality, go contrary to the other provisions of part 3 of the Constitution, that is fundamental rights. They deny basic equalities. You have already enumerated them, right from sati to so many other. Untouchability, first of all. It was being practiced in the name of religion. Mahatma Gandhi had to say that I believe that no scripture sanctions untouchability. But if you insist that it is sanctioned by the religion, then to the extent it sanctions this disgraceful practice, I refuse to accept the scripture to the extent it gives sanction to a repugnant practice like this. So, sir, first we will have to clarify. In fact, no need of clarification. Why? Because Constitution makes it amply clear. These are the areas where government is duty bound. You mentioned about triple talaq. Unfortunately, our governments, they have great record in dealing with untouchability, in dealing with sati, but in dealing with triple talaq, the record of the government is shameful. No government tried to improve that situation. Now, thanks to the Supreme Court, that this practice has been declared unlawful. And here, if you allow me another 1 minute, you know, after the judgment of the Supreme Court in the triple talaq case, until the time this bill was introduced in Lok Sabha, a period of about 3 months, there were more than, even after the judgment of the Supreme Court, there were more than 100 reported cases of women being turned out after 3 pronouncements of talaq. Then something happened in my former constituency. Somebody whom I know very well, who has been my supporter, he called me and said, Arif bhai, aapko yaad hai, do you remember 2 years back you had come to attend this wedding? I said, yes. Aaj uski talaq ho gayi. Today she has been divorced. Kya hua? What happened? Said both of them, they worked somewhere, the boy worked somewhere in south. So both of them, husband and wife, and their 3 months old daughter. They were coming back to Bahraich, and this man, the father of the girl, tells me, say, hum to khana paka rahe the, sham ko unko khilane ke liye. Then when they reached the station, something happened just before their train reached the station, and this boy lost control, and he pronounced divorce thrice. And this man was in tears, almost crying on the telephone. For next 1 month, I tried my best. I used whomsoever I could use to make the boy and his family understand that the religion does not permit this 3 divorce. There is no mention of it in Quran. Quran lays down a detailed procedure how divorce is to be effected. And now Supreme Court has also declared it to be null and void. But they were not ready to understand. After 1 month, I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister saying this judgment is of no use if you do not, and I quoted the chairman of the Islamic Council in Pakistan, Maulana Shirazi, who had written to Nawaz Sharif 3 years back that in Pakistan in early 60s triple divorce was banned. But he said it's going on. Why? Because you have not provided any punishment for one who does this. Now what happens? Man does it. The wife's family, the local Maulvi tells the wife's family that this triple divorce is the Qanoon of Allah. If you will rebel against it, then you will be condemned to hell. So these people, nobody comes to complain, and even if they come to complain, there is no punitive provision. I wrote this letter. Somehow they understood it, and they agreed to bring this bill in Lok Sabha. But in Rajya Sabha, the bill could not be passed. And I have heard only yesterday that somebody has made this announcement that if there is any change of the government, then we will go back to square zero. So the government, record of the government is absolutely dismal. It's only because of the Supreme Court that now this thing, at least some hope is there. So my view is that religion, as far as personal faith is concerned, government has no business to interfere. But religion, where it is responsible for certain social practices which go against public morality, health, repugnant to the constitutional morality, they contradict the provisions of the Constitution, government has a duty to intervene and to ensure that these practices are brought in accordance with the constitutional morality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Now we move to Mr. Jagannathan. Under your watch, Mr. Jagannathan, Swarajya has taken a very liberal position and very firm, very clear positions on questions of religion as well. We would like to hear your thoughts on the issue.
So, between God and government, obviously, there has to be no nexus. What I believe is that governments have no business to interfere in matters of religion, except on one simple principle. Where there is an assault on human rights, where an individual's specific rights are trampled on, then the government can certainly make laws and this thing like that. In this case, I would also make 2-3 other things. I think we have made a hash of the principle of secularism, which evolved in Europe, and it is actually not relevant. We've used the word where there is a separation of church and state, but in India we have not used it in that sense, and we have actually made it some kind of nonsense where I think it practically has no utility. What in the Indian state is not something that says that we will not interfere in matters of religion. They are just saying we are equidistant between religion, or we are equally favorable or equally hands-off from all of them. They don't say that we are not interested in what happens in religion and all that. In fact, we have individual states, and especially in the South. We talked about the Association of South India and all that. One of the abominations in South India is 1,25,000 temples are run by the state. Why are you doing this? Who asked you to run these temples? Why does an atheist government in Kerala want to run a Devaswam board and decide what one unique temple in Sabarimala wants to do when there are 140 other Ayyappa temples where there is no such practice? Why do you want to interfere in religion where there is absolutely need to? When you have a constitution allows you to practice, preach and propagate your religion. But in South India, if you control all the temples of the state, is the state going to promote Hinduism, or are you going to allow the devotees to do that? This is a fundamental thing. So what has happened, what Khan Sahib said, Articles 25 to 30, many of them are about protecting minority practices for the simple reason that you thought that in a country with supposedly 80% Hindu majority, there may be majoritarianism and you're going to suppress the minorities. That principle has been turned completely upside down in practice, where you say the rights enjoyed by the minority will not be enjoyed by the majority. So what will happen is the constitutional principle of equality before the law, where I think, let's say, I can't run my educational institution, I can't run my temple, and you say there is equality, you're a majority guy, so why do you need your freedom to run your own temples? I mean, is this secularism? You have to separate God and government in this. I mean, 1,25,000 temples, yeah, in the 5 southern states. I mean, why doesn't your blood not boil when you do this? I mean, this is completely wrong in principle, and you have to free the temples. And you're not doing that. Because politicians are not doing it because they want to suppress Hinduism, because they eye the money that comes in the temples. And since minority institutions are barred, they therefore latch on to Hindu institutions in order to milk them for what it's worth. But they will never let it go because they think, oh, there will be some fraud somewhere, so we have to enter the picture. Then you do the other thing. Why don't you propagate the religion? That's your job. It's the temples that have to propagate religion, but you do not do that. You don't allow these fundamental things to play out in this constitution, and you can. I think we have to follow either the European principle, separate state completely from this thing, or you've got to say, okay, each religion is free to practice what it wants, except when it comes to fundamental human rights. I think Ravi mentioned one point about sati, this thing. I think this Sabarimala and sati are not the same thing. One thing is the unique practice, a tribal practice that got incorporated into something like a unique temple like Sabarimala does not amount to discrimination, because Hinduism is not a congregational form of worship where when you're kept out, you cannot worship. You can. It is not a thing like untouchability where an entire range of Dalits were saying you can't enter a temple. It's not that. It's a unique practice of one temple, and it is not meant to be discriminatory. And there are, I can give you examples of 10 temples where men are not allowed, and this is actually a tribute to diversity. And if we do not understand this nuance between discrimination and allowance of certain amount of diversity, then we are not talking about constitutional morality, we are talking about constitutional massacre. This is not right.
Thank you, Mr. Jagannathan. You went into several contentious areas on the relationship of the state with the majority and minority religions, and state with religious institutions like temples, and finally whether practices such as exclusion of women of certain age in Sabarimala should be allowed to continue. We'd like to hear Professor Bhargava on these issues as well.
So 3 points. One, can I? Right, okay. 3 points. One is that we remember that secular is a term that we have imported from outside India, but we forget that religion is equally a term that has been imported from outside. And this is a binary, religion, secular. If you use the word religion, and if that's going to become a popular term, then you will find the use equally of the term secular. My actually thesis personally is that till the 15th, 16th century, if we are continuing to use these terms, religion and secular, then till the 15th, 16th century, we were a secular society. And what we are witnessing since the 16th century is the religionization of our society, right? And which is very deeply problematic for me. But I can't elaborate on this point, but that is the first point that I wanted to make. We've made a hash, actually, not only have we made a hash of secular, we've also made a hash of religion for precisely the same reason that you mentioned. Number two, there is nothing called one single European principle. Let's say there are at least three. There may be many more. There is the American model, which talks about separation of church and state, and that is a strict separation, which means mutual exclusion, ideally, not in practice, and at the federal level, not always at the level of the state. It means that the state will not interfere in the activities in religious affairs, And likewise, religion will not interfere in the affairs of the state. Right? There is a certain context in which that developed. Then there is the Western European model, where there is no strict separation. There is all kinds of ways in which religion and state are commingling. There was a time when there was great hostility in all of Europe, when, when the state was emancipating itself from the church, where the church had become politically meddlesome and socially very oppressive, then the state disentangled itself from the church. But over a period of time, the state is now fairly, it's got a friendly relationship with religion. And then there is only one country where that is not the case in Western Europe, and that is France, where the state actually has an attitude of hostility and suspicion to religion, in theory, right? So there are these three models, but all of them have one thing in common. The idea of secularism or a secular state emerged after a great deal of religious homogenization has already taken place. There was no religious diversity to speak of. There was only one religion, and in fact, not only one religion, but one church, which was dominant, right? So hence, the whole secularization was to do with separating the church within one religion. Now, in India, the whole thing is completely different, right? The context is different. Religious diversity is part of our landscape. There is deep religious diversity for thousands of years. So our issue is not, how to separate the state from the church or one religion, but how to manage this diversity. And what we have to remember is that wherever there is diversity, there are always possibilities of all kinds of, not just discriminatory, but also exclusionary practices, practices of marginalization. There's a lot of possibility of humiliation and degradation at two levels, not only between religions. So inter-religious diversity breeds possibilities of inter-religious domination, and there is intra-religious diversity, which is to say a lot of diversity within each of these religions, which breeds the possibility of intra-religious domination. And here I mentioned, if you have Hinduism in mind, of course, caste, but all religions have a lot of discriminatory attitude towards women. So in India, if you look at the constitution, our constitutional secularism, as I said, celebrates religious pluralism, and that is what it protects as religious freedom. But it has to have an attitude. It has to be very alert when it comes to issues of domination, either intra or inter. So I would say that Indians, and actually this is one of the greatest achievements of Indian secularism, what is very distinctive about it, and what demarcates it from every other secularism in the world. One we should be, if we really want to be legitimately proud of, that is what we need to be proud of, that we've developed a model of secularism, which is not at all against religion, but is against every form of institutionalized religious domination, whether it's intra-religious or inter-religious. And so inter-religious domination can be avoided by, exactly as Mr. Ravi mentioned, by state impartiality, by state neutrality, by non-discriminatory practices, both within the religious and in the non-religious sphere. But intra-religious practices, which are full of domination, they need a very subtle sort of attitude and behavioral practices on the part of the state to slowly, if not always bluntly, gradually undercut them so that we achieve a free and egalitarian society. On last issue about Sabarimala, let's face it, this is a practice that was introduced in 1991 by some high court, by some judgment, that women between the ages of 15 and 50 or whatever that age is during menstruation cannot be allowed into the temples. It's as recent as that. Before that, there was no such issue. So why is it not possible? Of course, there are all kinds of political issues which have got embroiled in it. But why is it not possible for the court to upturn its own judgment of 1991, In 1991, it allowed it. In 2018, it sort of revokes it. So what is this hullabaloo about? I don't understand it. It's been treated as an issue of tradition, as if this is an immemorial tradition. But it isn't.
It's not. Actually, if I just say one line,
yeah.
I said it is about allowing diversity in your religious practices. It is not about women. I'll just give you a simple example. Suppose tomorrow a bunch of women decide that we are going to create a Sri Shakti Mandir, which will be entirely populated by women priests. It will be donated by women. It will be built by women. And it will give primacy to empowering women. And say men can come if they are accompanied by their mothers or discriminate against men in some way. Do you think it was wrong? No, I don't think so. I would support this thing because I think your empowerment does not come from this arbitrary nature where you vandalize a certain practice merely because you say, okay, you are stopped, so therefore I have to go in. I mean, this is just being rebellious for the sake of rebellion. I don't agree with it. I think you have to allow others to be able to create a new practice if required. You should do that. That's what religion is about. Not something that came to me 5,000 years ago. I might start a religious practice today.
Thank you. Now we'll make this discussion open to the floor with questions. Please wait for the mic, identify yourself, and then address it to any specific panelist. Yes, please.
Hi, very lucid debate. Specifically on Sabrimala, you know, as Khan Sahib said, and Mr. Jagannathan, you know, if we can agree and appreciate Supreme Court judgment on triple talaq, why can't we agree on Supreme Court judgment on Sabrimala?
Sir, if you allow, I would like to make a comment on Sabrimala.
Sure.
You know, आपका शुभ नाम? What Mr. Jagannath says, in principle, I agree with him. But that is not the argument behind stopping women from coming to Sabrimala. The argument is not that this place is exclusive for men for some other reason. The argument is that women of menstruating age, impurity is associated with that. Sir, for biological factors, you are going to, all human beings, regardless of gender, are entitled to dignity, are entitled to respect. You are creating this awareness. You are creating this awareness that while menstruating, a woman is impure. But that is the whole argument why they should not be allowed to visit Sabrimala. If it is for some other reason, on some other ground, as you have said, I would be ready to look at it. But in this age, to give an argument that a woman is impure while she is menstruating, this is absolutely enormity. And this enormity should not be accepted at any cost.
Actually, the Supreme Court has said this is a form of untouchability.
Yes, absolutely. And there's one other point here. I mean, you know,
if that's the basis for which you want to say, right. I only say that if there is a practice for whatever reason, that you want to do this thing. They say it's a Naistika Brahmachari, so that they worship in a certain form, so they don't want to keep women of a certain age away. I said, okay, that's one practice that you want to follow. You do that. If it's a male bonding club, let it be so. What's your problem? I mean, let it be so.
Yes,
I mean, I don't think if you want to bring in all this impurity and all, I am against the whole idea of impurity in any case.
Yes.
I am against it.
But you mentioned tribal religions. I mean, it was something that was sort of controlled by or was a place of worship for the tribals. But for them, this is a sign of fertility.
Correct.
They find it very auspicious. So what we've done is overturn that and impose new notions which are really, you know, very strongly upper caste notions of what are purity and impurity. And then on that basis, we're not allowing women. And that is, so grounds are very important here.
The next question. Yes.
Thank you. I had a question about something that's been worrying me increasingly as these practices have developed over the last few years, that public functionaries, particularly politicians, engage in open display of religiosity and religious identity, even when they are acting in their public capacity. Is this, and including religious garb, is this not unconstitutional?
Professor Bhargava, would you like to take that? That display of religious affiliation by public personality?
Well, I said right in the beginning, you see, the principle of separation, which is associated with secularism, works at three different levels. One is at the level, at a symbolic level, and at the level of goals and objectives. So the secular principle is that the goal of the state, or the objective set out for the state and the symbolism of the state should not be identified with religion. Now, it can be interpreted in two ways. You can say not with any one religion, and therefore it shouldn't exclude others. Or you can say it should include every religion. And here, as I said right in the beginning, it can be every religio-philosophical view, right? So we can take, if my view is, okay, that's the first. The second is personnel, church, the personnel of religious institutions and the personnel of political institutions, they should not be mixed up. I firmly believe that that is what church-state separation meant, and this is how it should be. And number three is at the level of law and public policy. What should the state separate itself from law and public policy? In the American system, a lot of the times the Supreme Court judgments have interpreted this principle to mean that the state has nothing to do with, the state cannot make any law pertaining to religion.
Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan, would you like to say something on public office holders and religion? Sorry, please continue.
On public, so I would say for public officials, by and large, they shouldn't do it. But if they were to do it for one religion, they should do it for all. In a deeply diverse society such as ours, they should do it for all.
But that reminds me that actually points out a basic flaw in the Indian interpretation of secularism, which is, I mean, it's been interpreted as equidistance from all religions. But given the demographic imbalance, religion-wise, in the population, is that possible, or should we have a total separation of religion and state?
Yes, Mr. Khan.
Sir, first we must understand, we will have to look at the whole thing in a historical perspective. Right from the inception of Indian civilization, which may be 5,000 years or even older, India always viewed diversity as a source of enrichment, not as a source weakness. Ekam sad vipra bahuda vadanti. The truth is one, and those who try to know it, or those who have realized it, or those who are trying to know it, they describe it variously. We have always felt that all people cannot be confined to one single interpretation of reality. There are bound, even today, you see some incident on the road. If 5 or 10 people have seen it, you separately ask each one of them to describe it, and their stories will be totally different from each other. But the main thing what happened there may be the same. The question here is that when we say secularism, even Panditji in one of his speech in 1961, Panditji, self-confessed agnostic, and it is because of him that this wrong impression has been created that this is something which we have imported from the West. No, we have not. Even Panditji, what Mahatma Gandhi has said, I'm not going to quote. What Dr. Radhakrishnan has said, I'm not going to quote. What Maulana Azad has said, I'm not going to quote, because they held deep religious convictions. But Panditji was a self-confessed agnostic. And Panditji says, because we did not have an appropriate word in English, in Indian languages, therefore we are using this term. But secularism in Indian context does not mean to be irreligious or anti-religion. It rather means equal respect for everybody. But I totally agree with you, sir. I totally agree with you that we have to be careful, not only about our conduct, but also about the language and terminology which we use. Because if our actions and the language which we use, if it gives rise to community consciousness, I am not saying communalism, I am saying only community religion, our conduct and language may give rise to religiosity. Religiosity in turn gives rise to communalism. Community consciousness in turn gives rise to communalism. We must try to revive our old values, and the values are, we not only respect each tradition, we accept every tradition, as Swami Vivekananda said, Ruchinam Vaichitriya Dirju Kutil Nana Padjusham Nirna Meko Gamyas Tomsi Paisa Marnaviv. Like various rivers, streams, springs, they originate from their sources, and ultimately they all go and merge into the sea. Likewise, we human beings, depending on our disposition, our nature, we also try to traverse the same path and ultimately merge into that ultimate reality. Thank you very much.
On that note, I'm afraid we are out of time and we have to end this session. Thank you very much, Mr. Jagannathan, Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan, and Professor Bhargava.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan, Mr. R. Jagannathan, and Mr. Rajeev Bhargava. May I please request Mr. N. Ravi to present mementos to our speakers. Our last session before